Everything the left believes is a direct hypocrisy to another belief that they hold. All right, I want to go through like just a little bit of a Twitter thread here from Peter Hassan. And this is about the Texas voting law, because this situation with these Texas Democrats has been really funny. And I've been laughing at everybody kind of involved in this because I think it's hysterical. So they don't want to vote on it. They pack up, they leave, they get on 2 charter planes, they go to Washington, D.C. to escape having to vote for this law in Texas. The governor of Texas says they'll be arrested when they get back. It's a whole thing, right? And then the stuff that happened in Washington, D.C. was hysterical too. But I wanted to focus specifically on this Peter Hassan thing. So he tweets out, and he started doing this just a couple of days ago. How many people tweeting about the Texas election bill know that it requires at least 9 hours a day of early voting during the early voting period and requires 12 hours a day during the last week of early voting in large counties? Now, the answer to that is 0. Just like what happened in Georgia, people running around pitching a fit about the Georgia election law didn't realize that the Georgia election law made voting in Georgia easier than it was before, and makes it a lot easier for anybody, especially minorities and low-income people in the state of Georgia, to vote. It's easier under the new law than it is in Biden's home state of Delaware. It's easier than it is in New York. It's easier than it is in a whole host of blue states that are out there. So remember, put them on defense. You need to go on offense. If the Georgia election law is racist, then why are people so happy about Delaware and New York and these other blue states who have these horrendously racist election laws? Because it's more difficult for people to vote in those states than it is in the state of Texas. Doesn't make any sense. Put them on the defensive. So he goes out there and he says, meanwhile, this is the messaging coming out of the White House. Catherine Watson posted that Biden will repeat that these are the most egregious attempts to harm the integrity of our democracy since the Civil War. Talking about the Texas election law. And of course, they said the same garbage about Georgia. It's the new Jim Crow, all of these other lies anyway. Doesn't really matter. They're lying to everybody. But most people do not invest the energy, the time to look this stuff up. They just believe the tribalist nonsense. If their tribe says something is bad, they automatically believe it without vetting it for any truth whatsoever. So anyway, Peter Hassan says the White House really wants you to believe that the proposed Texas laws are worse than this. Okay. Now I'm going to open this up. Oh, did they delete that? Oh, they deleted those tweets. So I guess I can't do that. Never mind. So anyway, he goes through this and he highlights, as other people have done, they highlight how the Texas election law is better than various blue states in a whole host of categories. Those specific categories are the ones that Biden and Democrats are saying are racist, new Jim Crow, and a violation of civil rights, the worst we've seen since the Civil War. Now, how is it that stuff that is more permissive and easier for people to vote and allows more access to voting, especially for minorities and low-income voters, how is it that in Texas is racist, but more restrictive laws in blue states is not? Get the point? The same thing was in Georgia. We went through this where we compared Georgia to various other prominent blue states. If Georgia's law was racist, then those other states were really racist. And how many more people could be able to vote in the state of New York if they got rid of their racist laws that were inhibiting people from being able to vote? And they even brought them up to the standards of Georgia. Texas is very much the same thing. So these Democrats get out of there. They flee, right? They run away from voting on this bill, in spite of the fact that this bill makes access to voting easier, but also more secure. That's the thing. Of course, that's the crux. Everybody understands that. This isn't about access to voting or making sure that legitimate people vote or voter integrity. It's not about that. It's all about being able to commit voter fraud, which happened a lot in Texas. It's just that in Texas, they caught them. Massive quantities of people got caught in Texas. So you have the Democrats, they charter 2 planes, right? 2 planes, and they fly to Washington, D.C. to escape and beg and plead with the federal government to violate both the national and the state constitution of Texas to go ahead and interfere and control the elections in the state of Texas. Constitution makes it crystal clear And again, everything the left believes is a direct hypocrisy to another belief that they hold, right? When Pennsylvania illegally changed their voter laws at the state level, using only election officials and not the legislature, when Pennsylvania illegally did that, and it has been ruled illegal by a court system, when Pennsylvania illegally did that, what was the argument that leftists made? States' rights. State can control an election however they want. Those same people are now saying that Texas doesn't have state rights and should not be able to have elections conducted in the way that Texas sees fit. As long as it meets the criteria of the constitutions of both the federal and the state, then they can conduct elections the way that they see fit. Isn't it weird? Again, I have to point this out. Everything that they believe is in direct contradiction to something else that they believe. When it benefits them, it's states' rights. It's okay. When it doesn't benefit them, no, the state doesn't have a right and it's not okay. This is always how they operate. You got a couple of things that you need to understand, and I know that I'm repeating this over and over and over again on this show over the past several years, but I'm going to keep doing it because you need to understand it. And since so many of you are now active when you weren't active before, now it's probably a tool that you'll be able to absorb and remember. Everything the left accuses you of doing, they themselves are doing. If they accuse you of being a racist, they're a racist. If they accuse you of being a tax cheat, guarantee you they're cheating on their taxes. Every single thing that they say you're doing or accuse you of, they themselves are doing. The other thing is that there is always a direct hypocritical stance on an issue to another issue that they have a position on. Never fails. Voter ID, okay? It's impossible for people to get IDs. You can't get an ID. It's racist to require an ID. If you want to join a union or you want to be at a union event, you have to have an ID. But the unions represent poor people and working class Americans. Well, I thought poor people and working class Americans struggled to get IDs, so how is it that you can require an ID to go to a union event? Wouldn't the union want the people that they represent to be able to get into that event? There's always a hypocritical stance. It never fails. Always a hypocritical stance. When Obama had kids in cages, it wasn't a big deal. It was the best that they could do because there was a surge of children and they didn't have facilities and they were just trying to keep those kids safe. It was the courts that forced us to separate them from their parents. That was all true. When it was Trump, he might as well have been committing genocide. They called it internment. They did a whole bunch of other stuff on it, right? Now that it's Biden and there's more kids in cages right now than have ever been there, the media won't even touch it. The very same facility that they used to call a concentration camp, it's a direct quote, is now called a model of what we should be doing going forward. It's the same facility. The exact same facility. We were talking about this on the live stream earlier this week. Yesterday, maybe the day before. They even redefined hypocrisy. Because hypocrisy is a word that pretty much everybody kind of gets, even though people misuse it all the time. But people understand hypocrisy. And when you point out you're being a hypocrite, they really don't like that. So what did they do? They created a new term, whataboutism. No, don't do that whataboutism. No, I'm not doing whataboutism. You're being a hypocrite. You believe this, but now all of a sudden you don't believe this. You know, you get into Chuck Schumer, always called them illegal aliens. And then suddenly there's a Republican president. Now Chuck Schumer's crying on national television saying it's dehumanizing to call immigrants illegal aliens. A couple of months before you were okay with it. Every single thing that they believe, they have a contradictory belief on. Every single one. And so again, you've got this situation with states' rights and voting. If you change state law to benefit Democrats, it's states' rights. If you change state law to enhance voter integrity without reducing access and actually increasing voting access, it doesn't benefit Democrats. So therefore, it's a violation. It's illegal. It's a civil rights abuse. It's the worst thing we've ever dealt with since the Civil War. Here's some more hypocrisy. And we've seen numerous examples of this throughout the pandemic. The Democrats have been praising these Democrats from Texas for fleeing the state and running away. Now, again, there's a parliamentary procedure to doing this that can be done. Depending on how it's done and depending on the state laws and things like that, there is a parliamentary procedure to not deny a quorum by leaving, okay, or to not showing up to work. So I'm not on the boat of they should be arrested when they come back to Texas. I'm not on that, but I think it's funny watching this whole play out. What is interesting to me, though, is that if Democrats walk out and Democrats run away and flee to Washington, D.C., to beg for the federal government to violate states' rights on election law, violate the Constitution of Texas on election law, violate the United States Constitution on election law. That's what they were doing. They charter 2 airplanes, they get on the airplanes, and they take selfies, and not a one of them is wearing a mask. Not a single one. Now, I am old enough to remember a certain old man telling me that was Neanderthal thinking. I'm old enough to remember last week when Democrats and leftists on cable news and in the Democratic Party were freaking out over Senator Rand Paul, who's a doctor, wanting to repeal the requirement to wear a mask on an airplane. And everybody was talking about how that was dangerous and that was going to get people killed by doing that. And here's 2 plane loads of Democrats not wearing masks in violation of Joe Biden's edict on masks on airplanes. And the excuse of that would be, well, they just privately chartered the plane. They're all vaccinated and everything else. And what about the crew? And since when does vaccination matter? You're all telling us you have to wear masks even if you're fully vaccinated. You still should wear 2, maybe 3, maybe 4. But they don't have to? Another hypocrisy. You have to wear a mask even if you're fully vaccinated unless you're a Democratic Party political official. Then you don't have to. Then it's okay. Gretchen Whitmer, you're not allowed to go to a restaurant and sit with 4 of your friends unless I go to a restaurant. And then all of my friends can come together and we'll push the tables together and we're fine. Everything is a contradiction to another belief that they have. Every single thing. More coming up. Newstalk 95.3, Michiana's news channel.